Thank you all for joining us for live Q&A and office hours with Dr. Laura Nelson, Assistant Professor of Sociology at Northeastern University. This session is a follow-up to Dr. Nelson's video lecture that you've already watched. Once again, Dr. Laura Nelson is Assistant Professor of Sociology at Northeastern University. She uses computational tools, principally automated text analysis, to study social movements, culture, gender, institutions, and organizations. She's an open source and open science enthusiast. She seeks to use open source tools and computational methods to make the social sciences and humanities more transparent, reproducible, and scalable. I'm also pretty sure she is the first SICSS speaker to speak at multiple locations in one summer. So we got her first, and then I think also she spoke at Oxford. So, you know, Howard first, Oxford second. All right, I'm going to jump into a couple questions to give our participants a chance to get their hands up. We have an excited audience with us tonight who has lots of questions for you. So Laura, can you start by talking to us about your interest in Twitter and machine learning? What advice might you give to others interested in Twitter?
Yeah. So Twitter, so I haven't published on Twitter. Twitter is, for me, a tricky, it's an important site of study. It's a tricky site of study for many reasons. It's difficult to get data. It's probably one of the easiest social media sites to get data from, but that doesn't mean it's super easy to get data from them, especially historical data. So they recently released their new academic Twitter account, or a developer account, which I think is making things a lot easier. And I think a lot of the SICSS sites have been working with the academic Twitter account. So that's exciting. And I think that's a really good place to go to get data. Just whenever you're doing Twitter studies, remember it's a single site. It's an N of one. It's one platform. So it's an important platform, but it's a one platform among many. Not everybody is on Twitter. Not everybody on Twitter is active. So it's just important to remember representation and thinking about who is on Twitter, who is not, and of those on Twitter, who is active and who is not. A huge proportion of people who have Twitter accounts don't ever tweet, or they tweet very rarely. So that would be my main kind of methodological advice, would be to think carefully about who it is that you're studying and who it is that you're missing. So studying Twitter as a medium of its own is super useful and helpful, and I hope more and more studies come out on Black Twitter in particular. But it is just very one small slice, right, of of society, and it's just important to keep that in mind and not make overly broad generalizations like all of society talks to each other like this, and this is how conversations happen in all of society, which is just absolutely not true. I think there needs to be more comparative studies as well. So I would love to see a comparative study of Twitter and Instagram, or Twitter and TikTok, Twitter and Facebook. Maybe Facebook's a little bit old. Twitter and, I don't know, other WhatsApp, if you could get WhatsApp data. So I would love to see comparative platform studies, and we need more comparative platform studies, I think.
So before I hand the microphone over to Regis, who will ask our first participant question, I would like to ask you to let us know who's doing interesting research in computational social science right now. So who are the people whose work that you're reading? And also, what are the topics that you're excited to see on the lips of other computational social scientists? What's the work you want to see? A lot of our students, our participants, are trying to come up with research projects right now, so we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I'm particularly excited about historical stuff right now. So Carly Knight at NYU and Emily Erickson at Yale are employing computational methods to look at historical topics, which is great and I love, and I would love to see more historical stuff coming out. And that's just my personal kind of quirky, nerdy interest is in historical and archival work, and that requires kind of bringing in the digital humanities who are thinking carefully about how to translate archives into digital format. So that kind of group I'm following very closely. The other, I think, frontier is images and video. So I don't think we should be allowed to study things like Twitter or social media without including images. We've done that for years. We've just looked at text. If images were included, it's usually the metadata of the image. Is there an image or not? where was it posted from, but rarely does it include the actual image itself and the features of the image or video. And just increasingly social media and the way we talk to each other is centered around images and videos. There was a panel a few days ago in the main SICSS festival about images and video, which I was on. And I think it was really exciting to hear what people are doing about images. And there was a scholar in China who made the point, which I thought was really interesting, that images are more universal than text. I can't read Mandarin, so if I were to read a paper about Mandarin as a language, I would be pretty lost. But images translate much more seamlessly across cultures. I don't need to understand Mandarin to understand a picture that was posted in China. So I think that's a really exciting frontier, as well as thinking about how images can travel easier than text. This scholar also noted that a lot of the images posted on Chinese, the version of Chinese Twitter, it's not Twitter, it's a different platform, was pictures of text because that escapes the censors. So as politics becomes censored in a lot of countries more and more, as totalitarianism kind of expands its reach, the text is going to be in the images. So that just reinforces to me that we absolutely cannot ignore images and videos, and we really need to bring that in. And luckily, transfer learning, Keras, which is a Python package, OpenCV, which is another, sorry, I'm a Python person, I'm not an R person. OpenCV is another Python package, have made it really easy to analyze images in a computationally cheap way. So previously it was very hard. Images are much more intensive to analyze than text because they're bigger, but we can do it now with transfer learning. So there's a lot of issues, but it's opening up. And I think that absolutely should be a place to go. As I said, comparative platform studies, and I have a particular interest, I will never do this, but I would like somebody to do this, which is Pinterest is like oddly ignored by the computational community. And it's a really, really popular website, and has been a really popular website for a long time. And compared to Twitter, it's just gotten basically zero attention. It's a lot of women, it's a lot of fashion and design, and I think it's actually a really important platform to study and maybe compare to other platforms. And there's images there, of course, as well. So I would love to see more computational stuff on Pinterest and perhaps some other social media sites that just have not gotten any love from computational people because we're all focused on Twitter.
So one of our participants who's going to be in the queue for a question shortly mentioned that we should shout out Dr. Anjali Adukia's work on race and gender representation in children's books. So that's in the chat box for everyone. So thank you for that, Todd. Todd is 2 down in the queue, so you'll get to meet him shortly. I also want to mention, I stand corrected. I thought you were only talking at 2 sites. You are in fact speaking at 3 sites. So our site, also us first, and then also Oxford, and then finally Princeton. So thank you for joining us. We know you're in high demand. So Regis, why don't you go ahead and turn your camera on and ask our first participant question.
Okay. Hi, Dr. Nelson. Thanks for coming. I am Regis Saxon. I am a 5th-year PhD student at George Mason University in sociology. And I did attend the main panel where you're talking about images, and that was also informative. I'm definitely taking notes on everything you've said about that because I plan to study Twitter. But so I'm new to kind of R and Python and things like that, more trained in like the analog methods, especially with ethnography or things like that. And I was curious about maybe your thoughts on how ethnographers could extend some of these methods to their own work. You know, one of my first thoughts was about usually we kind of take our field notes and then we kind of hand sort of code those and go through in that way. But you know, this seems to present what you were laying out presented a kind of a way of doing that. I don't know if you had any thoughts on how that might be done.
Yeah, so I love this, and I think ethnographers can absolutely and should be using these methods more. So one, I think the obvious one is, as you pointed out, the field notes. Ethnographers take extensive field notes, and kind of sorting through that and analyzing that data could be bolstered by computational methods. I'm personally not a fan of qualitative data analysis software. So if I were to do ethnographic field notes, I would not use it. I would use computational methods combined with qualitative kind of reading. I know that's not a popular position, but I think that that's an obvious connection. XML coding, which we can argue about whether that's computational or not, extensive markup language, which is really popular in the digital humanities to code text in depth, I think would be, again, this is my personal opinion, that should be the way we're going when we're qualitatively coding interviews and ethnographic field notes. So if I were to start an ethnographic project, I would definitely use XML to code the field notes, because I think it's reproducible. It's a really great way to share with other people, and a good way to force yourself to think very carefully about how you're qualitatively coding your ethnographic field notes, like far more than just highlighting sentences in vivo or something. So again, we can debate whether XML is computational or not, but I think that could be a future for qualitative coding that I would be in huge support of. But there's another direction that I think combines computational and ethnography or interviews, which is trace ethnographies is one thing. So thinking about digital traces not as an end product, but as a invitation to go deeper through an ethnography. So this was made popular in the study of open source software communities like Wikipedia or Stack Overflow. So you treat Wikipedia trace data as just a representation, not of the real world, but as something that could be connected to the real world. And then you join the Wikipedia community, you learn how they work, and then you use the digital data as a way to dig deeper into what are the processes that are going on behind there. And that means you watch people who edit Wikipedia, or you interview people and you say, why did you do that? And so you use the computational analysis of the digital trace data to prompt questions for the interviews, or prompt ethnographic field sites that you would go in and do in-depth observations of. And you would craft your observations around the computational insights you get from the digital trace data. And I think that could be expanded to any site. So Twitter, you could do trace ethnography of Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. So you're using computational results to then feed into ethnography and interviews. So you could even use them as interview prompts, right? Like, look at this digital trace. What do you think of that? Which is what I'm doing, what I plan to do with the image analysis project on Instagram. Pose the images, selected images that were selected based on the computational analysis to participants, to the respondents, and say, what do you think of this image? What does it mean to you? So that combination of like selecting things from digital trace data and then testing or bolstering that with interviews and ethnography is so important. It's just underutilized. And I think if you only use computational methods, you're missing a big part of the story. Not only that, you can get things wrong. You can get things very wrong if you assume digital trace data is some sort of representation of the real world. So I just think we need ethnographers, we need interviewers to come in and set people right when they're just analyzing digital trace data computationally. We're at a very precarious position where we're easily could go in the wrong direction with social science if we just go down this computational trace data route without thinking about the kind of socio-technological systems behind it. So gosh, we need ethnographers, we need interviewers, and there's so much opportunity to combine the two in that way. So those are the two ways I would do it: to analyze the field notes, but also to prompt ethnographic sites, trace ethnography and interviews, with that interplay of like using the results from the computational analysis to prompt or shape the ethnography and the interviews that come later.
Thank you for that. And Todd will be up next to the question, but let me give you one more before I introduce Todd. So obviously, IRB put certain requirements on all of us with regards to thinking about our participants. And we began our time this summer by reading Matt's book, and the first chapter was on ethics, and he tries to sow that throughout the last chapter is on ethics, and he tries to sow that throughout his work. And I'm wondering how you personally approach your research in terms of ethics, the decisions you make about which data you use and the protection of the privacy of your subjects, especially when we're talking about this world of trace data. So can you talk to us about your process? And then after that, I'll introduce Todd.
See, this is why I like historical research so much, because I don't have to think about that. So if I'm doing research historical research, you still need to think about privacy and the effects for sure, but it's not quite the same as dealing with living people who could be immediately affected by it. So one model for this is Moya Bailey's model. She wrote kind of a autoethnography of her analysis of Girls Like Us, which is Janet Mock's led hashtag that was building a community for Black trans women. So I assign her article in all of my classes, and it's like probably the most stringent feminist ethics around how to deal with research with communities that you want to study. And she went to Janet Mock and she said, I would like to study this hashtag. I would like to collect the data. Is that okay with you and your community that is built around this? And if so, what could I give to you that would help you build your community or understand your community better? And she said, I don't know what she responded, but she said, yeah, it's great. You can study us. This is what we would like back in return. And if she had said no, Moya Bailey would have dropped it. And that's what you have to be prepared for. So if you're going to go this route of, community participation where you really get the full consent of the entire community to study this, if they say no, you have to back off. So just be prepared for that. And that can slow research down quite a bit. And IRB is not going to require that. This is not an IRB requirement. This is an additional kind of feminist ethics approach. And that, I think that's a good norm. It will slow research down a lot. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I think we can be slower with our research. Unfortunately, junior scholars need those papers. So it's not as feasible if you're a junior scholar and you're really itching to get some papers published. But particularly for more vulnerable communities, and now of course we know communities are being targeted by Twitter mobs and online mobs, we need to be really careful about that. So for some communities, it's probably a necessity. For others, it's probably less of a necessity. But that would be like one strong, stringent model of how to do digital analysis in an ethical way. But the big thing, and Matt Delgado brings this up in his book, is unintended consequences are much more present in digital research, because even if you get the permission to study somebody's Twitter account, you didn't get everybody they're connected to, and you're likely going to grab data on everybody they're connected to, which isn't the case with a lot of other modes of data collection. And as we all know, it can get very big very quickly. So you could all of a sudden be studying 10 people and you've gotten all their permission, but your data includes thousands or hundreds of thousands of people. That's how these networks work. So the risk of damage is like, it's huge. It's huge compared to traditional research and data collection methods. And even compared to things like, doctors who have medical doctors who have a very strong ethical component of their training. If they mess up a surgery, they're going to impact one person and their family. If a data scientist messes up a privacy concern, they could impact thousands and even millions of people. So we really do have to think carefully about this. I'm not saying the kind of stringent ethics approach where you get everybody's active participation is necessarily the best one all the time, but it is something to consider each time you're starting a project around this.
Todd Hall will ask our next participant question.
Hi, Dr. Nelson. Thank you so much for providing your talk and for being with us here today for Q&A.
Yeah.
I had a question around your discussion of the machine learning and maybe traditional kind of inferential statistics. And in particular, I was talking with another grad student. I'm a rising second year grad student in education policy at the University of Virginia, and was interested in using some document similarity measures, and we kind of went back and forth in the discussion. And basically, one of the warnings that I got was that we don't yet have inferential statistics for that measure. And so in terms of thinking about the output of that work, it might be tricky for a more traditional journal that may be used to inferential statistics. And so I was curious if you, in your experience, are seeing journals that typically publish more traditional work being more open to some of the machine learning and maybe not having inferential statistics in the same way, in the same paradigm, and whether there's more flexibility now or any recommendations if you're going that route, but thinking about publishing in a more traditional journal.
Yeah, I find that journals and reviewers don't want to give up their p-values and their significance tests. So if you can't offer them a significant, like a confidence interval or a significance test, they struggle to think about what that means. So bootstrapping is a common method used in the more computational side of things, which I used in that intersectionality paper, which came from the paper that was published in ASR by James Evans et al. Or Alex Kolakowski et al., where they also use the bootstrapping method. So for now, I think you do need to construct confidence intervals around whatever measure you're doing. And it doesn't need to be done using the kind of theoretical traditional way. It can be done using the bootstrapping way, where you just take random samples from your data, repeat your measure 40 times, and that becomes your 95% confidence interval. So I do recommend doing that. And there are norms around that, around bootstrapping, and jackknifing is another method. So I would learn those methods if you're going to go for like a more traditional journal, which I think we should be, because this stuff needs to get into those journals. But you will need to have like a confidence interval measure, something to convince the more traditional minded quantitative people that this measure is not just, random chance. And how do we evaluate? You also need a substantive, like what is the substantive evaluation of your measure? Is a similarity of 0.8 versus 0.6, is that a big difference or is that a small difference? So if two documents have a cosine similarity of 0.8 and two other documents have one of 0.6, and you're saying this similarity, the 0.8 is significantly closer than the 0.6, you need to back that up and translate it into a heuristic or some way. You think about odds ratios, it's not going to be an odds ratio, but it's got to be something similar to like an odds ratio or a beta coefficient, where you can say this is substantively important, and this is why I think it's substantively important. So I would add those two paragraphs to any paper. What is the confidence interval? Why are you confident that this difference or this measurement is capturing something that's not just random? And then what is the substantive important? Because that's what traditional inferential statistics has got, right? The beta coefficient and the p-value. So you need to do that, which is a little frustrating. The other kind of potential future for just kind of the more quantitative part of this is to abandon frequentist statistics and just go the Bayesian route. They have a very different way of thinking about confidence intervals and probability. And that language is, machine learning is based on Bayesian, like naive Bayes, right, is a Bayesian equation. So that is a much easier translation to make, the computational to Bayesian versus the computational to frequentist statistics. Now, unfortunately, most traditional journals aren't even caught up with Bayesian analysis. They don't have that kind of framework. But if you want to, so the other approach is just say, look, I'm doing Bayesian stuff, and I'm going to use the language and the words in the Bayesian tradition and just try and force that through. So Bruce Western, who's not a computational person, he's a Bayesian person. If you read some of his work, he provides good models on how to craft a journal article around Bayesian approach to statistics. And it's just a much easier translation. I would say computational is Bayesian. So, but yeah, you can't. I've tried to say, I'm not going to use p-values. I'm not going to give you a confidence interval. It doesn't make sense in the work that I do. And it's always failed. It's never worked. So for now, I would encourage you to figure out a way to approximate those quantitative measures to get it past those reviewers.
Our next participant question, comes from Yesh.
Hi, Dr. Nelson. This is Yash Tarimala, he, him, his. I'm going to be a second-year PhD student at UNC Charlotte. And thank you so much for your talk. It was really educational because I am starting to do intersectionality theory framework-based classroom climate data research and things like that. And the way you explain inferential versus machine learning, how like quantitative methods can also be complemented differently with like qualitative epistemology versus like just inferential, and then the future of machine learning were really interesting and educational. So I have a two-part question, which are not related maybe. The first one is, in my personal circle, the more and more I research intersectionality, understand the framework and stuff, when sharing with others, people are often giving me the critical feedback that, oh, intersectionality is too broad, or you're just bringing people down to categories. That's not all people are. And I try to tell them, yes, I know they're not, because there's context in all of this, but they somehow think we are breaking down people to just race, sex, gender, and they somehow like fight back when I go with that framework. So do you have any experience dealing with things like that? Or like they go to Marxist theory and then critical race theory and then say, oh, intersectionality is based on those. You're trying to divide up people versus bringing them together. That's my first question. The second one I was wondering is, when you mentioned the future of machine learning could be qualitative data and the rigor in qualitative analysis and ethically translating that information, I was wondering, can you share a little, like Todd expressed, like traditional journals and things like that. So for new scholars who are interested in mixed methodologies with qualitative data, but are also looking for industry jobs where quantitative is the key, dashboards, visualization, networks, and things like that. Can you share a little bit on how we can equip ourselves for a good career in terms of what methodologies we need to have and how to like navigate being hireable by both industry and academia? I'm sorry, it took a lot of time.
No, those are both great questions. Yeah, your first question made me think of Jennifer Nash's book, where she critiques the intersectionality framework, which you're probably getting different types of critiques, but she critiques the intersectionality framework for becoming so watered down it doesn't mean anything anymore. Everybody says they're an intersectional scholar and everybody talks about intersectionality, and what they mean is like, oh, they included a gender variable and a race variable in their regression analysis. So, hey, I'm an intersectional scholar because I included both gender and race, or they interacted gender and race, so that makes you an intersectional scholar, for example. But there's many different ways Jennifer Nash criticizes the way that intersectionality is kind of, this is like this trade-off, right? It becomes popular, which is what you want. You want people thinking about this stuff, but it becomes so widespread that it loses its like critical edge to it. Same thing happened with diversity. Sarah Ahmed critiques the way diversity was used when it was kind of sucked up into the law literature. So it's a problem. Implicit bias, I would say, is the same thing. Kind of lost all its edge when it became so popular. So intersectionality, if you're going to do an intersectional analysis, you have to deal with issues of power. It's not just about intersecting a race and a gender variable and saying, oh, this person has a gender and a race and a sexuality, therefore I'm treating them as an intersectional analysis. It's not just about looking at the different ways that somebody could identify. It's the intersection. It's the relationship between those identities with systems of cultural, social, I would say technological power. So that for me is the key. And if you're missing that, if you're missing the kind of way it interacts with systems of power, you're not staying true to the original kind of goals of intersectionality, which was to think about how race and gender, whatever, interact with each other and with systems of power. So I do critique kind of quantitative scholars who just throw an interaction effect in and claim they're doing an intersectional analysis, because they're not thinking about what that means in the social context, the socio-political context, the socio-technological context. So in some senses, you don't want to just reduce people down into these categories. That's not the point. The point is, how does that impact their lived experience? How does that impact the way they can move through the world, what they have access to, the resources they have access to? Now, there's ways to do this completely quantitatively. Abigail Sewell, I think, has some great models for how to think about this quantitatively. Zuberi has some good models of this as well. So you can do it completely quantitatively, but don't lose sight of this idea that this is not just people with identities. It's people with identities that are being shaped in ways because we live in this society. And if you don't lose track of that, I think you can stay true and motivate an intersectional analysis. And that would be my biggest kind of emphasis. And Kimberly Crenshaw says this all the time on Twitter as well. So if you follow her on Twitter, she's interaction effects are not intersectionality, because you have to think about power. You have to think about society. And that's where Marx comes in-ish, critical race theory, etc. So systems, not individuals. But you do that. That's what you do in an intersectional analysis. All right. So that's intersectionality. How to deal with quantitative and qualitative methods in industry and academia. I think industry, and this is not just like I hope, I really do think that they don't know what data science is, even though it's been around for years. Really, like they think that, oh, we got to use data science, we got to use machine learning and AI, and you can kind of dazzle them with numbers. But if you come in and you have a serious background in qualitative methods, meaning, and in particular, you know how to deal with case studies, because most computational analyses are case studies. It's an N of 1 or an N of 2. And you're thinking, oh, I have millions of tweets, I have millions of comments. What do you mean this is a small N study? It's a small N study. It's one case. It's one company. It's Twitter. It's one platform. It's Reddit. It's one platform. And it's not representative. I was mentioning this with the Twitter stuff. It is not representative of the entire society or any like section of society. It's representative of the people who are on that. That doesn't mean we can't study it, but that means that we need to understand what that means, and that you can't draw these overly broad conclusions from that. And data scientists are coming around to this. I give data science maybe like half a year to a year to rediscover sampling theory. And they're going to rediscover it, and they're going to claim that they discovered it. And I'm going to be super frustrated because sociologists have been dealing with this for decades. Since the 1950s, we've been thinking about probability samples. They're going to discover it and say, oh, we need probability samples. And if you don't have a probability sample, your conclusions will be statistically biased. And it's true, because they are statistically biased. So give it 6 months and data science will discover this again. But if you can come in and say, this is why who is in your data matters, and this is how you can deal with it. The fact that we don't have a probability sample, which you almost never do in computational approaches. And this is how we deal with a single case study. How do you draw conclusions from a single case study that can be implemented in any meaningful way? That's what qualitative analysis gives you, is that kind of small N case study approach, understanding how when you have a completely non-representative sample, how you can still draw robust conclusions and actionable conclusions from that. And that's what's missing in most just purely computational data science-y training programs, where they're not yet taught. They will, again, I think they'll rediscover it in 6 months. They will be taught that, but they're not yet taught how to think about that. And so if you can come into these companies and say, I can do the computational stuff, I can do your machine learning, what you're learning here at SICSS, I can implement scikit-learn models, but I can give you more than that. I can tell you what this means because this is a single case, this is a non-representative sample, and I know how to draw conclusions from that. I think that's super, super marketable. And you just have to be confident and tell them, you don't know you need this, but you actually really do need this, and show them. And there's so many examples of how results have gone completely backwards and wrong because people don't think about representation and who's in there and how to deal with case studies. So pull those out, throw their own words back at them, throw their own studies back at them and say, this study was wrong. It was flat out wrong. And this is why it was wrong. And this is why my expertise will prevent that from happening. One example that comes to mind from a few years ago is Even Good Bots Fight, which was looking about how bots on Wikipedia revert each other's edits. And they drew this huge conclusion that it's like this massive inefficiency in the Wikipedia system. And Wikipedia is massive, right? Like millions of people use Wikipedia. So if there's an inefficiency in the system, those who are running Wikipedia would want to know about it. So they published this paper using just computational methods, and Wikipedians took note, and then they dug into it and they tried to replicate the analysis, and they realized it was just wrong. It was completely wrong. So when you find examples like that, and they did what I was talking about earlier with the trace ethnography, they interviewed Wikipedians and they corrected the record, other scholars corrected the record. That's what you need to show them. Like, this is how it can go wrong. And this is why my expertise is important. And this is why I think qualitative expertise, like we're at a brink of being disaster because things can go so wrong if you don't have that. expertise and knowledge around it. This is not just like a kumbaya, let's bring computational, quantitative, and qualitative together. Not at all. Like, I really truly think it's, if computational sociology, social science is going to move in a good direction, it has to incorporate rigorous qualitative methods into its approach.
Before I introduce Regis for the next question, can you, because you and I overlap very briefly at Berkeley Sociology, I was arriving, you were leaving. I think we've lived in the same cities a couple of times. I need to move to Canada apparently to spend time with you. Can you tell us how you were first exposed to computational social science and also specifically to SICSS? Because you are, like I said, you are deep in our community. So can you tell us that origin story? And then I'll pass the mic to Regis.
And I'm not even a SICSS alum, technically. It came a little bit late for me. I was already faculty when it started, so I was kind of past the training age. So why did I get, okay, so yeah, I did my training at Berkeley. There were no computational sociologists at Berkeley. There was a budding and growing digital humanities group led by Marty Hurst in the School of Information. So the School of Information was really the place that I went to for kind of more computational minded stuff. But this was also, when I was doing this, this was the height of the MOOC movement, the massive online, like, oh, what does that stand for? Some courses, massive online something courses. They're probably called something different now, but this was like, everyone was super excited about MOOCs, every massive open online courses. Everybody was posting MOOCs online, and it was like supposed to be the future of academia, which it isn't and wasn't. But there was a lot of courses available. So Christopher Manning and Dan Jarafsky, who are like the leading force in natural language processing at Stanford, had a MOOC on natural language processing. And so I took that course online. It was when I was in New York City doing field work, archival work. I took that course, and in the course of that course, they had you build your own naive Bayes classifier. And that was really my introduction and the like, oh yeah, okay, I can do this. It was in both Java and Python, but it was, all right, I can do this, I can do natural language processing. And I had the support, the theoretical support of my advisor, Kim Voss. So she kind of gave me the go ahead to look into this stuff, even though she didn't do it herself. So it was a combination of having an advisor who wasn't opposed to going in this very strange direction, access to MOOCs, which now we have all sorts of tutorials online, and then having a small community of people at the iSchool at Berkeley. That was like, no, this is a thing, this is a future, this is something you can do. And that course, that natural language processing course, I believe is still online, and I would still take it again, even with all the other kind of tutorials and stuff. It's just a really fantastic course to take. So there's so many more opportunities these days and such a larger community around this. I don't know how I got into the SICSS stuff, except that Chris Bale and I cross paths a lot, and we're kind of in the same world of analyzing text data. He's kind of moved on to different things, but his early work was looking at culture and social movements and extremism online using text data. So that kind of brought us into conversation with one another. Rochelle Turman as well, yeah, she's great. She was a Berkeley person. And later in my career, at Berkeley, when I came back as a postdoc, they also were these computational text analysis working groups. So a community very quickly formed. D-Lab was huge at Berkeley at the time. So I was early working for D-Lab. So that also, like, as I was developing that stuff, that provided additional resources. So find your people. What's the conclusion? That was kind of an idiosyncratic personal history. Find your people, even if it's small and even if it's not in your particular discipline, and then just build from there.
And I would like to mention that these are your people right here, everyone. So you've got this great cohort of SICSS folks that hopefully will be a resource for the rest of your life. So Regis is going to jump in with our next question.
Sure. Thanks again. I'm taking so many notes on this. I have, it's kind of a selfish question. But part of it is kind of two parts. The first one was with kind of word embeddings and how you kind of explain how we use that in our research. What are the kind of the limitations on what it can't do that we should probably keep in mind? And part of the reason I ask that is that what I'm hoping to kind of look at is tense. You know, how are people kind of not just how they use these words, but how and what tense do they use this? Do they use this in terms of a future-oriented sort of tense, or are they using it as looking towards the past? And I'm kind of looking at that in the context of Black Lives Matter. But so that's my selfish part of the question. But I was just, but also wondering broadly, what are the limitations we should keep in mind?
Yeah, word embeddings, like all methods, have more limitations than they do affordances. So they're kind of have been the new trendy thing. They were maybe 2 years ago, like the trending thing, and continue to trend. Before that was topic models was the trending thing. I think in the future it will be transformer models, transfer methods like BERT. That will be the new trendy thing. So be cautious of trendy techniques, because people will use them and they'll apply them to everything, whether or not they fit, and that includes word embedding models. So word embedding models do a few things really well. They treat words in context, so they're better than the bag of word models that topic models, for example, take. And they can look at word similarities and relative word similarities. Many of the models throw out document level covariates. So like it doesn't preserve documents within a word embedding models. It models it over the entire corpus. And that can cause some challenges if you're trying to say like, this group of documents, do they treat word embedding a word differently than this group of documents? If you throw it all in one model, you lose that, right? You don't know what document produced what. And then comparing models across. So if you trained one on 2 sets of documents and tried to like match them up, I think that's not there yet. Technically speaking, we're not really there to be able to compare across different groups of corpuses. A lot of people do it, and I think it's fine, but we just got to be very cautious. Like aligning word embedding models, which you may have heard that, how do you align 2 separate models? It's not accurate. So I would just be cautious about anything that uses alignment through word embeddings. Other things that to be cautious about is they will pick up dominant things, and particular in the case of intersectionality, identities, but non-dominant ones, they'll mess up completely. So in the paper in the American Sociological Review, the geometry of culture, they weren't able to pick up race for a few reasons. Race as an identity. One is it wasn't as strong as gender, but the other reason is the words that we use to indicate race today, black and white, are very common words, right? They're used to describe just colors. I have a black computer, I have a white pen, I have a white paper. So it gets confused. The model very quickly can't distinguish between black as an identity and black as a description of objects, or white as an identity versus white as a description of objects. So when you're getting into that, like, because I do historical stuff and the words were very different at the time, I was able to look at race as an identity because they didn't use black and white. So they used white, but less black. So that's a very thing you need to be very cautious of. I mean, they're really sensitive to word choice. So do robustness checks, do validity checks. Don't just trust that your model will work. You really, really need to check, especially if you have a smaller corpus. You can just get wildly different results depending on the parameters you put in. Are you choosing a window of 5 versus 10 versus 50? Are you choosing 100 dimensions versus 1,000 dimensions? You should never use 1,000 dimensions versus 50 dimensions. So there's kind of variations in parameters you put into a word embedding model, especially with smaller data. And by smaller, I mean like 1 million words-ish, can like produce wild swings in your results. So you've got to do robustness checks to make sure that these parameter choices you're making aren't really influencing the results that you're getting. And again, the bootstrapping method can help with that, but also just sanity checks on yourself. Like, does this make sense? Like looking at, choose a word, are the highest cosine similarity to that word, does that make any sense to you? And if it doesn't, you should just pause and say, well, maybe I need to think about how I retrain this model. And always, 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 it's a tool. It does not represent an ontological truth about your data. It never represents an ontological truth. It is a tool to encourage you to see patterns that you might not see just by reading, to evaluate patterns or look at like the consistency or the magnitude of patterns. It is not an ontological truth about your data because you're making so many decisions about how to craft that model. The parameters, the window, the dimensions, what you include. And just remember that, and that gets back to qualitative methods as well, that it's a heuristic, not a end point truth. Oh, this is society, is this word embedding model, or this is my corpus, is this word embedding model. Definitely take inspiration from people who produce maps, because you would never treat a map as like a representation of the real world. It's a tool that you use to do something like find the subway stop, or get from one street to the next, or learn the topography of a mountain. You would never treat it as an actual representation of your data. And too often computational folk treat topic models or word embeddings as an actual representation of the real data, and it's not. So just keep that in mind.
With that, I'll also add, just looking at the way that the African continent is rendered on maps will tell you everything you need to know about the way things are represented. So you mentioned tools. Can you talk to us a little bit about your interest in and use of open source tools and their importance in our field of computational social science? I know we have a few people in the audience who are working on producing peer-reviewed papers, but just as many people who are thinking about using the funds that are available through SICSS and through our partner Mathematica for the creation of some sort of open source tool. So can you talk about that?
Oh, yeah. My instinct is always to warn people against creating an open source tool, because people don't realize how much work it goes into all of it. So creating the tool, it's, you know, not super, all of you could probably create a really awesome tool that does something really amazing, but then making it accessible to people. So you need extensive good documentation, and you would be shocked at how many people will misunderstand your tool, or they'll need some documentation you've never thought of, and they'll use it wrongly and get confused and get angry at you. Why isn't this doing what you said it's going to do? And it's, you know, their fault, but they didn't know that they're using it wrong. So documentation, and then maintaining it. So if you want people to be able to use this tool 5 years from now, 6 years from now, 10 years from now, who is going to maintain that? Where are you going to host it? Who's going to keep updating it? Software updates all the time, right? So if you're writing something in Python and it relies on NumPy, NumPy doesn't update and you don't update your tool, it's going to break. So it's constant upkeep. And this is why the successful tools like scikit-learn, NumPy, Python, R has libraries as well. It's a huge community of people working on it. I'm talking hundreds of people sometimes, because it's such an intense, hard thing to maintain. Wikipedia is millions. So be very aware of what it means to create a tool and release it to the world. And if it's something that you really believe in and want to push, I would suggest connecting to an existing open source project and seeing how you can use their infrastructure then, and say, I'm going to contribute to your project and I'll contribute my own, like, I don't know, maybe you contribute a network measure to network X, or a visualization tool to Matplotlib. So build on what exists rather than trying to create your own thing. And if you really don't like the existing infrastructure and you want to create your own thing, that's great. I love it. Just be aware of what that means and how intense that can be, and how difficult in particular it could be to maintain it. And talk to librarians about it. They're really good at understanding the shelf life of digital things, digital platforms, digital tools, and how hard it is to maintain something over time. But I love open source because it's free in both senses of the word. It's free for people to use, and it's free for people to build on and modify. And it's not, you're not boxed into what somebody else thinks that you should be doing. So the problems I have with things like NVivo, Atlas TI, even Stata, is if you want to do something and it's not in their software, there's nothing you can do about it. You have to leave their software. And the problem of proprietary data formats is really frustrating. So if you produce something that, like a Stata has their own proprietary data format, DTA, which is really efficient for Stata. It's a binary format. It's great for Stata. If I wanted to read that into Python, I can do it now because people are working on it, but I couldn't access that data on my own. I couldn't read it without the software Stata. These proprietary data formats drive me absolutely batty. Why not just make it something that all programs can read, including humans, right? Humans should be able to read it. Humans can't read binary. So open data formats, more than open source, open data formats are really important. And it's important for just the money aspect, right? If you're taught in Stata and you are at a university and you get access to it and then you graduate and all of a sudden you're facing a $200 purchase agreement just to reproduce what you did before, you're like, what happened? I didn't know I had to pay for this. So that's a problem as well. So I don't want to discourage people from creating tools, but I do want people to come into it with an awareness of how difficult it is, and open source communities exist. And if you can piggyback on them who have a lot of resources, and if you can funnel resources to those communities in order for them to help you and for you to help them, I think that's a really productive way to go. And I would talk to open source people who work in that field. I don't create tools for many reasons, but like Chris Holdgraf comes to mind. He's really open. He's a Berkeley person. Has worked on a lot of open source projects, and I think would be a very kind of sober voice in how you build really good open source tools and such. But I do also think that the open source community is white and they're men, and we really need to diversify that community really, really, really badly. So there is a huge need for additional voices, just different approaches, different ideas, different ways of structuring it. So in that sense, like it's dismal in many open source community. It's toxic. It's just dominated, but it's not even just white men. It's like this very particular type of white man who kind of dominates these communities, and we really need to diversify. And that's one of my, I don't know what to call it, not a shame, but I feel a responsibility to like try and do more in those communities as a woman. But also I'm like, I just don't have the time, so I'm not going to pressure myself. But I don't know if there's a way to diversify those communities is really important.
So I will add, as someone who's been working on and been trying to launch a tool for about a year, that all of these different organizations that offer funding have on the website, Black people, please apply. But the funding is not coming as fast as their performative intentions.
Yep.
I would also add that for those building tools, that having a workable model of some sort, which obviously you need funding in order to do, egg, chicken, in order to show people what you plan to do will take you a long way. More, even an image, but for those that are attempting to fund these sorts of things, they need to see something. So that's my 2 cents. My final question for you, Laura, seeing no other hands right now, is to, I see, someone said minimally viable project, MVP. Thank you so much, Todd. So my final question for you is, we have a lot of people in this room, especially women, and we've also had quite a few of our speakers, women, come in and say that when they found themselves in these innovative spaces on the cusp of doing something amazing, there were just all these amazing haters that just appeared. And it sounds like you were very fortunate to have Kim Voss in your corner, so that when you were doing something, and that part of that is the ethos of Berkeley sociology, people do all sorts of bizarre things. It's a bizarre model. Can you talk to us about how things have unfolded for you in spaces where you were innovative? What was the type of criticism you tended to get, and how did you get past that?
Oh man, it's, being one of the things I wanted to say, and this gives me an opportunity to say it, is don't be afraid to do things differently. Like, there is kind of these strong norms in the computational community, and many of them are bad and wrong. And like, I think we can take it in a different direction. And so if you think, oh, I have to do it like the way, I don't want to pick on people, but it's just kind of Michael Macy, some of these big names, even Matt Solganic, who's fantastic and wonderful. They do things a very particular way, and it's good research and it's fantastic research. It is not the way you have to do this type of research. There are so many different other avenues of doing it, so many different subjects to study. So really, like, don't be locked into what seems like, choose your own way. Don't be locked into what seems like is the kind of, oh, this is how you do computational stuff, and this is how we have to do computational stuff. Like, do your thing, do it differently. What motivates you, what excites you? And for me, that was in my early time in grad school, the one thing I wanted to do was trace the history of feminist movements, in like obscure feminist movements in Chicago and New York City back in time. using computational methods, but using computational methods in a qualitative way. It was like this confluence of just bizarre stuff that nobody knew how to interpret and understand. And it was super challenging because it was challenging to do computational work. It was even more challenging to do computational qualitative work for a subject where you're studying like feminist movements, which, you know, people want to slot it into these like niche areas. And this is true of race research. This is true of so many things. So it was a battle, but it was a battle that I was willing to fight. And, you know, I had the resources being at Berkeley, which is an R1 top tier program, and not everybody has that. So I understand that. So I had a lot of privileges to be able to make this fight. So I, just as an anecdote, so I submitted a paper based on this kind of confluence of bizarre methods and topics to American Journal of Sociology, which is one of the top journals in sociology, in 2014. It was published last week. 7 years it took. And it took a change of editorship from a man to a woman. And it was the new editor at AJS, Elizabeth Clemens, who's a woman who studies women's movement. I was like, you're the one who's going to appreciate this paper. So I took it to her and I said, look, what you have to champion this. Nobody else is going to champion this. The previous editor, who was a man, did not champion it at all. And so I found her again. This is find your people. You got to find your senior people who are going to understand what you're doing and champion you. And she did it. And it's published now, and I'm thrilled it's published. With 7 years, I mean, which is crazy. You can't, as a junior scholar, you can't wait 7 years to publish papers. It's just not feasible. But it was because nobody knew how to evaluate it and understand it. So it's a huge challenge, and I fought for this, and I have so many privileges to be able to fight for that, and not everybody has it. So it's a real problem, and it's a structural problem, and it's something that senior people, there's probably no senior people here, but senior people need to change it. And if I ever am lucky enough to get in the position where I can be a senior person with more stability, that's something that I'm gonna really hope to fight and change. But there are people out there who are fighting that, and you find them and you say, I'm fighting for myself, you need to fight alongside with me. Oh, 7 years.
And on 7 years. And on that note, please join me in thanking Professor Laura Nelson. I think I'm joined in my belief that we are excited to watch your career, and we can't wait for you to be that senior scholar that helps to champion all of our work.
Hopefully.
So thank you so much. Thank you. I plan to take you up on your offer to come visit. I'm coming to Canada very soon. Very soon. All right, so folks, we're going to close there. If you're interested in office hours, please head to one of the 3 rooms that are open. If you've gotten your fill of knowledge from Professor Nelson this evening, we will give her back her time. There's no adult alive who does not like to get 30 minutes of their time back.
Reclaiming my time.
Reclaim your time. So I see one person in 5 to 5:10 right now. So if anyone else is interested in joining her for office hours, please head to those rooms. Also, you're welcome to head to your breakout rooms to continue working with your teams. Remember, we do not have a debrief tonight. Look for all of the things on the Slack. Have a great night, everyone. All right, let me stop our video. Where is that?